Okay, so I've seen a lot of people out there who have been asking questions about the Black Priests in Marvel Comics. How powerful were they? Well, they were very overpowered in Marvel Comics, and you guys will see what we're talking about as we get through this. But one of the things to point out is that the Black Priests only really appear in the New Avengers line of comics. And the reason for this is because while Hickman's Avengers and New Avengers runs do eventually dovetail together during Time Runs Out and then start alternating titles to explain how the superheroes are coping with the imminent collapse of the multiverse, up until the events of Time Runs Out, Avengers and New Avengers were telling two completely different stories that would ultimately come together. New Avengers focused on the incursions for the most part, and that's why you only really see the Black Priests here. They're mentioned in other stories, but you only really see them in a meaningful way and only really explained in a meaningful way within the context of New Avengers. So the first time we actually see them takes place in New Avengers issue number 5. We don't really get much from them, and instead it's really by way of Black Swan that the Black Priests are even revealed to the Illuminati in the first place. Now, for those of you guys who are unfamiliar with Hickman's Avengers and New Avengers, the long and short of Black Swan is she is a part of one of many groups that exist out there that are dealing with the incursions in their own way, some of which are trying to prevent the incursions, some of which are trying to further them along, right? It really kind of depends on what group you're looking at here. And while we don't have to go super in-depth into the Black Swans themselves, for her character, what she had basically established was that she was from an alternate reality, which basically had what were called the Hidden Lands. And so the way that she explains this is she says, "My name was Yabat Uman Taru, third sister to the Crown Prince Dadingra." I think that's how you pronounce it. But she says, "My brother was the heir to the throne of the hidden city and keeper of the great key. The key unlocked the city's greatest treasure, a library of worlds, a gift from the Ivory Kings. Now he could use the key and he could open the door, but the library could not be navigated by the untrained. Legend said that only the great ladies, whom none of our people had ever seen, could find their way through the twisted path between worlds. Still, every day my brother unlocked and opened the door, hoping the ladies might appear. He did this every single day until the sky turned red." And that was basically when her world encountered an incursion. And that's when the Black Priests appeared. And she simply just says, "The Black Priests descended from their earth to ours. No one was spared, no one escaped except me." And ultimately, she took the key, she opened the Library of Worlds, and she found other Black Swans within it. And that's one of the things to know when it comes to the Illuminati and even the incursions that were taking place in Marvel. In essence, when Jonathan Hickman started writing Avengers and New Avengers, he dropped us in the middle of this whole series of incursions that were happening across the multiverse. They'd been happening for quite some time and were continuing to happen. So, colloquial terms, right? We showed up to the football game after the second half. That's really kind of what this meant. And so, of course, she goes on and is adopted by the Black Swans. But that's the only real context you get for the Black Priests within issue number 5. But that begins to change as more time progresses. Specifically in New Avengers issue number 12, which comes as an epilogue to the story of Infinity. Now, Infinity was a beefy story, and there were a couple of things happening at the same time. As far as like the Earth-based superheroes went, it was the invasion of Thanos trying to find a son, yada, yada, yada. But as far as the incursions went, it was the builders traveling the universe, and in fact, just trying to quote-unquote fix mistakes, different things like that, but their main target was to destroy Earth. And so this is important for the Black Priests because of the fact that the builders being a credible threat, it was a massive war that involved all the empires across the universe. They barely won by the skin of their teeth. But when this is brought to the attention of Black Swan, she says, "The builders, you say, how very ominous. That is indeed some threat." And she says, "System creating universal migrants, creators of engineers, more than capable of destroying worlds. Did you not find it strange that they were limited in how they moved through your universe, that a race so advanced was limited to traveling in what was essentially a straight line? It's because their vessels were not built for traveling great distances outside of their superflow." She says they heavily invested in their conduit, and now, without it, they're trapped and unable to elude Raboom Alal, who up to that point in time was the mysterious guy who was the cause of the incursions. And so she asks, "Are you aware that these builders are confined to 5,000 realities? Like, who worries about them? There's no reason to be concerned about them." And that's where the Black Priest comes into play. Because when the Illuminati don't really seem to grasp what it is that she's talking about, this idea that the Builders aren't that big of a threat, despite the fact that the Builders were so difficult to beat, she says, why is it so hard for you to understand? And where they say, like, we understand, right, there are worse things out there, she says, no, you have not been listening at all. There are worse things coming. You fret Builders, but what if it had been the map makers, not just their Sidera Maris, but the map makers themselves? What if it had been the Black Priests? And what if it had been the Ivory Kings? What would you have done? And so right off the bat, it positions the Black Priests as being one of the most powerful and deadly groups that exist out there within the multiverse and this whole game of worlds. Now, again, we didn't necessarily know what this meant, just meant they were very powerful. But that all changes with New Avengers issue number 13, because then we actually get to see what they're capable of. Now, this whole conflict with the Black Priest takes place in Earth 23099 and is actually witnessed by Reed Richards and the Illuminati by way of something called the Bridge. Most people who are familiar with the Fantastic Four know what that is, but in case you don't, basically it was just a bridge that Reed Richards created in Jonathan Hickman's Fantastic Four that was rebuilt during the collapse of the multiverse that allowed him to look into other realities. And so what they saw looking into this alternate reality was the Black Priest coming down and wiping out every single superhero and really all forms of sentient life that existed on this world. And there were small little things that we realized along the way. For example, they're unaffected by the power cosmic, that they're resilient, reforming instead of splintering apart. So they're almost these indestructible beings, right? Black Bolt uses his voice. It does damage to them, but it has no meaningful effect. But they speak in a language that isn't easily understood. And so one of the cool things that we learned comes by way of Magneto and Charles Xavier in this alternate universe. Because Charles says, whoever these creatures are, Magneto, their purpose must parallel ours regarding the incursions. If they plan and scheme, they can be controlled. And if not controlled, then perhaps I can fathom what their ambitions might be. And so that's when Xavier tries to read their minds. And when he does, he says there's not one mind, but thousands, tens of thousands, unfathomable, right? Quite literally a gigantic hive mind. The number of minds that Xavier tries to read at once is so extreme, it almost puts him in a catatonic state, and it psychically paralyzes him. And so that's where Magneto removes their helmets using his powers. And what you end up finding out is they're not really people in a traditional sense. They're humanoid in nature, but still, right? They have symbols on their heads and different things like that. And so the Reed Richards and Black Panther of this alternate reality start putting their mind to task, right? They realize that the Black Priests are capable of matter reorganization. And that's when they realize matter reorganization implies no organs, which demands a rethinking regarding weakness. It demands a rethinking regarding the laws by which they are governed. And that's where Black Panther says not creatures of science, but magic. And that's where the Black Priests just kind of speak to the group as a whole. And they talk about the idea of science and magic, that these concepts are amusing, and they say, a lesson for you, defenders of a soon dying world. Ignore disciplines. The underpinning of all things is much simpler. All that matters are the words. All other things are best left unspoken. And literally, using their powers, they destroy everybody who's here. They kill them all. And so then they just kind of muse to themselves and they say, so it is as it always is. Many cannot endure the words. Are there others here we need to speak with before we claim this space? And then they realize they're being watched, right? Watchers, watching. There's a mirror active here. Is that you looking on, map makers? Or do I have the honor of addressing an ebony king? A day is coming, convergence, and on that day, the final word will be spoken. If all that you have believed has led you to a place opposing us, the Black Priests, then you have to ask yourselves, what value does your life have at all? What hope is there? And literally using their abilities, they obliterate that entire Earth. Now, given the context of this story, it shows a few different things. Number one, beings like Galactus would be helpless against the Black Priest because the power cosmic doesn't work. They can't be destroyed in that singular way. And even if they were somehow damaged by Galactus, they could just reconstitute themselves. The other thing here is the fact that they recognized they were being watched by Reed Richards and the Illuminati from an alternate reality, even even if they didn't know that it was Reed and the Illuminati from an alternate reality, the fact is, now we're talking about some kind of multiversal cosmic awareness, and it only ever gets deeper, right? What they're capable of only ever gets more and more explored as time goes on. But it's not to say they do not have weaknesses, and they cannot actually be destroyed. There is one instance, for example, in New Avengers issue number 16, where they had confronted the superheroes of the Great Society. The long and short of this is that in an alternate reality, all the traditional superhero teams of Marvel, the Avengers, the X-Men, the Fantastic Four, they had fallen in a massive war, which is supposed to be the Kree-Skrull War, and that what ended up happening is a new age of heroes rose up to take their place. Basically the Justice League in Marvel Comics. It's really all it is. Sun God, who's obviously Superman, different things like that. But they also possess a helmet of a Black Priest, and that information, along with the Illuminati realizing they've staved off incursions before, basically points to the idea they've defeated the Black Priest before. Now, what happens off panel, we never actually see how they do it. And the story of the Great Society is kind of tragic because essentially the Illuminati meet them when an incursion takes place between the main Marvel Universe and the Great Society. And so ultimately, one group has to go. And it ends up leading to the Illuminati, really only by way of Doctor Strange, essentially destroying the Great Society and then destroying their world. It's a really, really good story. It's one of my favorite moments in the entirety of Hickman's Avengers and New Avengers run. But then you go into New Avengers issue number 27. And that's one of the coolest things about this, right? This is when you actually get into Time Runs Out, the 8-month time skip. And for those of you guys who don't know, during the 8-month time skip, you get things like Captain America losing the super soldier serum, for example, and he just turns into a grizzled old man who's just really grumpy all the time, right? Those are the kind of things, Marvel wrapping up plot threads. But the reason why New Avengers issue number 27 is important is because it's when we get the first real instance of the Black Priests actually being pushed back by the multiversal Avengers. Now, it's kind of an explanation of what was happening at this point in time. When Time Runs Out basically takes place, Robert DaCosta, Sunspot, had effectively taken over leadership of the Avengers, and given how intelligent he was, he figured out that with a unified force, the superheroes stand a much better chance of understanding or even preventing the incursions than they did previously with a fractured force. The Avengers over here, New Avengers, Illuminati over there, and it just kind of goes forward in those two circumstances. And so what he did is he formed the multiversal Avengers. Thor, Hyperion, Starbrand, Nightmask, right? Just a handful of people, right? Nihilo, Abyss, they were sent out there into the multiverse, and the intention was to try to find the source of the incursions, or find Rabu Malal, or find some way to bring this whole thing to an end. And so what ends up happening is they come across the Black Priests. Specifically, they come across the Black Priest's homeworld. And one of the things that they had figured out along the way in this journey, and having come across various Black Priests, which more often than not would actually lead to them retreating, is that they realized that the Black Priests can basically destroy them all by speaking a single word. So the first real offensive move here is to stop them from speaking. But even then, they don't fully know how the Black Priest powers work. And so you just kind of start getting these small moments. For example, one of the Black Priests says, life-generating systems of the builders, defenseless to the right world. Speak the word, priests, speak the word. And when they do, they destroy one of the ex nihili. Now, for those of you guys who don't know what they are, the long and short of it is that when Jonathan Hickman created the builders in Avengers and New Avengers, he was rewriting how all life was created across any and all universes. And the builders were the ones responsible, hence the name, right? Building worlds, building life-sustaining systems. Ex nihilo and those guys were the gardeners, right? So basically planting the seeds of life on any world so it could evolve and grow and so on and so forth. Abyss was kind of the antithesis, destroying life. But the fact is, they're incredibly powerful, so much so that one ex nihilo was able to terraform the entire world with an evolution bomb. It was kind of nuts, right, how it happened. It was a really, really funky part of Hickman's run. But with them having so many ex nihilo on their side and those numbers wearing thin, that's when Abyss kind of starts to figure out what it is that's going on here when the Black Priests are attacking them. Because the Black Priests basically start speaking in unison, but it's only ever like a group of 5 Black Priests here, 3 Black Priests over there. And that's why I say Abyss figures it out. Well, really, it's actually Abyss and Nightmask, right? Nightmask says, I get it now. how the words work. It's reality displacement. They're attacking the tangible world with language. And Abyss kind of builds on that and says they're manipulating the base code of everything, reordering the sequence of matter. You have to stop them from building the words. So in essence, they're using their language to rewrite all of reality. But that's not where it stops. And that's where things get kind of funky, because what ends up going on here is that with the builders having their powers, for example, one of the things that Thor does, for example, is he attacks enough of the builders that it breaks their ability to speak, right? Stutters their speech, for lack of a better word. And as that happens, the Ex Nihilo go in and they start launching their attack. And that's when the Eye appears. And the Eye brings the entire conflict to an end, which at that point in time is revealed to be Doctor Strange. Because during the events, or leading up to Time Runs Out, that 8-month time skip, Doctor Strange had disappeared. And Doctor Strange had realized what the Black Priests really were, what their story was, and what their intention was, which he basically explains to everybody else. And it's really cool the way that it happens, because he tells them the Black Priests are caught up in a conflict they were never intended to be a part of. There is a war underway between two separate forces, the Ivory Kings and Rabu Malal. And from what I've witnessed firsthand, they both want the same thing. And it's the same reason that you are here, the destruction of everything. It's simply that Rabu Malal and the Ivory Kings are going about it opposite ways. Now, it is important to specify, at the time that Doctor Strange makes this statement, he doesn't fully understand what's going on. So he doesn't actually realize that while Rabu Malal is responsible for the destruction of worlds, it's actually the attempts of Rabu Malal to essentially stop the actions of the Ivory Kings. Now again, I'm trying not to spoil as much of this as I possibly can. And if you have read the story, you already know, right? You already know who these guys are, what these groups are, and so on and so forth. But that's where he explains the nature of the Black Priests, in the sense that he says, the Black Priests are the field surgeons of the multiverse. We seek out Earths as they're the touch point of the collapse and eliminate them, thereby saving an entire universe. What we do is not simple murder, it's triage. And we believe that if we destroy enough Earths, then we can stabilize all of it, including the collective heat death of the universe. We can save everything. That is what this power is. The words are life surrounded by nothing but death. Do you know what word we use to destroy a world each and every time we do it? We use the word life. And so Nightmask asks a question, right? So each priest has a letter, and together they make a word, which is like spell casting. And Doctor Strange kind of corrects that. He says sort of, right? It's more like a symbol, which means something, but the meaning changes with each symbol that you add to it. In code-breaking terms, it's actually akin to a replacement cipher. Now, the reality here is that it's a little overcomplicated in terms of how it's kind of being explained by Doctor Strange, right? So the long and short of this is that, let's say that the Black Priest wanted to cast a spell that says, teleport this being into the sun, a singular being. That entire sentence is a singular sentence. And so because each word would be represented by a symbol, you would have 6 Black Priests that would step forward, and they would all cast their spell in unison. It'd be like 6 people saying each of their letters together at once, harmonizing almost. And that person would be teleported into the sun. But let's say that after doing that, 200 superheroes suddenly appear in front of them. They come charging into the battle. Well, then at that moment, 2 of those Black Priests would step out, particularly the ones using singular terms. This being. And so in turn, they would be replaced by these beings. The spell goes off, all 200 are teleported into the sun. Now, as you can imagine, the abilities that they can achieve, the number of spells they can cast are astronomical, especially because of the fact that they could potentially be using words that human beings couldn't even process or understand if Noam Chomsky's studies are to be believed. But what matters is this: as you can imagine, their power, their strength, is also their weakness, because the more Black Priests you kill, the weaker their spells become because of the fewer number of spells they can cast. And so that's why Doctor Strange, when he became the Eye, he says, I am Sorcerer Supreme. I do not speak letters, I speak words, and I know them all. And so he learned every single symbol that the Black Priest spoke. So the entire language now resides within him. Should anything happen to the Black Priest, their power will continue on with Doctor Strange. Now, the statement he made of them being field surgeons of the multiverse, one of the important things to know is that Jonathan Hickman never really gives us an explanation of where they come from. And it's one of the reasons why I waited until this moment to kind of establish that, because it's the tell-all comic, that the closest we really get here are essentially theories from Reed Richards, from Black Panther, different things like that, where they kind of have this idea that when the multiversal collapse began, that in an act of self-preservation, in a way that's very similar to your body producing antibodies to fight off a cold or a flu, that the multiverse produced the Black Priests. Now again, we don't know if they were at one point human beings that were transmogrified into the Black Priests, or if they just appeared out of thin air one day. But the fact is, they were seemingly created by the multiverse, but we don't absolutely know for sure. And so what ends up happening is that the groups effectively split in two, that one group ends up traveling out to try to find Rabu Malal, the other group travels out to try to find the Ivory Kings, two sides of the same coin. And so even if they're not able to defeat either of these opposing forces, which I can promise you right now they are not, that they could potentially gather enough information in order to bring this information back to the other superheroes and effectively show what's truly going on with regards to the multiverse, which I can tell you that doesn't happen either, right? Basically everybody dies, and this kind of story comes to a head specifically with New Avengers issue number 31. And it actually kind of ties back to the initial story in New Avengers issue number 5 and the whole idea of Black Swan and the Library of Worlds, because that's what they're hunting for. One of the things that's established kind of during and after this is that the Library of Worlds is basically a literal library outside the multiverse. So those who are within it can access any reality across the entire multiverse. And so while the Black Priests have just kind of been forced to travel from their reality into other realities, if they access the Library of Worlds, the journey wouldn't be so long. And in fact, they could fan out by the tens of thousands and attack multiple worlds at one time. And even if they chose not to do that, at the very least, they have a bird's eye view of the multiverse, and they could see everything that's going on at any particular point in time. They could know where to attack, when to attack, and how to basically bring an end to the multiverse. The crazy thing about this is that what ends up happening is when Doctor Strange and his guys lead an attack against the Library of Worlds in order to take it, seize it for their control, and basically bring down Rabu Malal, the entire force of the Black Priests are sent to attack this thing, which is being guarded by the Black Swans. And the Black Swans are exceedingly aware of the Black Priests, right? She says, we're even told, Black Priests, just like old times, they've come for the door. And that's where it's like, not like this, right? Like never like this before, right? They sent too many, possibly all. Go and seal the door. I will hold them back as best I can. But it doesn't work, right? The Black Priests blow the door open, only for all of them to be realized they've effectively been led into a trap, because as they start making their way through the Library of Worlds, having no idea how to navigate it, not really understanding anything that goes on here, one of the things that happens is they're led to a room where words cannot be spoken. Like literally, when Doctor Strange tries to speak, nothing comes out. And because the power of the Black Priests is confined within the power of the word, if they can't speak, they can't defend themselves, and it makes them easy pickings. They're all killed. They're all destroyed by the Black Swans in one fell swoop. Like the Black Priests are wiped out, annihilated instantly, right, within moments. Now, Doctor Strange survives, but only because of the fact that Doctor Strange doesn't need words to cast spells. And kind of as a little bonus to this video, it is one of the coolest moments in the whole story, right? Because he says, whether it's the white light of illumination or the dark arts of the most midnight hour, the first thing you learn about magic is precision. It's like any other science, really. The devil is in the details. And he says, yes, I am the great eye of the Black Priests, and the words which I have so recently mastered now fail me as they do them. But I am also the Sorcerer Supreme, a master of many things. I've spent my life learning the minutiae of mysticism, rituals, lost language, symbols of power, spirits, incantations, principalities, and the much darker things. But all of it, the art, the understanding, the control, it all relies on precision. There is an order that must be adhered to, and urgency, desperation, these things defeat order. They bring chaos, and chaos it brings the fall. And so ultimately, where he's able to defeat pretty much all the black swans that are present, he's defeated by others. And then he's brought forward to Rabu Malal, who's shown to be none other. With that being said, guys, we're going to bring this video to an end. You didn't really think I was going to spoil it for the people who haven't read the story. Come on, guys. Come on, guys. That was never going to happen. Anyway, guys, we're going to bring this to an end. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this explanation video. If you did, drop a like. And yeah, I will catch you all later. Peace. I'm a terrible person.